The beautiful girl she looks at now is named Mary, aged 10 in December 1968, accused of several first-degree murders after confessing everything to the police, and the first murder she committed at the age of 10, with fewer victims being children her age. It was proved that Mary was not only killed, but she enjoyed every second, and she enjoyed watching the children's families suffer psychologically. She was sentenced to life in prison and is now officially considered at the top of the list of the most dangerous children to kill in the world. What's the story, and what is the complex and psychological incident that this innocent child went through to turn into an incarnate demon? I stopped this video and Mary B was born on May 26, 1957. Mary, in fact, is an illegitimate child of a prostitute named Betty, Ma Cricket. Betty was working as a prostitute. She was 16 years old at the time of her birth. As soon as she saw her daughter for the first time, she immediately and provocatively asked the doctors and said, "Take this thing away from me." Things started to get worse from that moment. Betty traveled a lot to work in Glasgow, Scotland, and her mother's frequent and long absence relieved Mary a little, who was subjected to the worst physical and psychological torture from her mother, as if she was blaming her for coming to life. Once, Betty's sister watched her trying to give her daughter to a woman she repeatedly tried to adopt, but quickly rectified the situation and stopped the sister. This suspicious deal and the return of Mary to her mother. Mary was known to have had strange accidents, and these incidents were repeated periodically, such as falling out of a window, or taking an overdose of medication. These incidents are said by one novel that they were not a coincidence, but rather an attempt by her mother, Betty, to get rid of them in a way that did not leave any trace. In another version, it says that Betty was enjoying the attention and sympathy she received from her daughter's misfortunes in a disgusting and disgraceful way, in what is known as a private syndrome by proxy. Not the worst part, Mary said that at the age of 5 her mother repeatedly offered it as a sex toy for men and forced her into sex work. And this was always a secret that she never divulged. Mary first felt dead when she saw her 5-year-old friend being run over by a bus. With all these crazy and tragic events after turning 10, Mary became a strange child, began to have dangerous psychological complexes, became introverted and socially isolated, and became incredibly irritable and violent. On the day Mary committed her first murder at the age of 11 weeks before the incident, she was acting with uncharacteristic strangeness. On May 11, 1968, Mary was playing with the 3 years in a shelter used in the World War for Nazi air raids. While playing, a child fell off the roof of the shelter and was seriously injured. When the news reached his parents, they thought it was just an accident. But the crow increased the next day, as 3 women filed a complaint with the police, because the child Mary Y tried to strangle their children, called the police, reprimanded her with a short lecture, and then released her. On May 25, 1968, exactly 1 day before she turns 11, a girl of her age is supposed to be at home, preparing invitations and a small party for her birthday. This is for normal people. Mary lured a child to an abandoned house in Scott, a wall in England, named Martin Brown, and he was 4 years old. After strangling him, she brought her friend Norma home to show her and show off what she had done. On the same day, 2 boys were playing in the forest, and he entered the abandoned house to shock him by seeing the body of a child that I begged some workers nearby, and when they arrived at the place, they recognized the baby Brown directly, where they shared some sweets with him. Just an hour ago he didn't understand how he ended up dead in this ruin, and soon found themselves surrounded by a crowd of children and adults, all driven by curiosity to see the child's body that he had heard of. Mary left the place with her friend Norma, and went to the boy's Aunt Marson quickly to tell her that she knew where she was, and that he was covered in blood because of an accident. The poor woman followed her in good faith behind her nephew's killer to the abandoned house. When the police came to the scene, they were confused. There was little blood and saliva on the baby's face, but she didn't find any signs of assault such as a cut, bruises, or traces, but she found something strange near the bodies, a small bottle of aspirin, to assume that baby Brown died as a result of an overdose of aspirin. She wanted to know what the psychological state of the child's family looks like now, Brown, so she would come with her friend Normal to the child's house, and his aunt would open the door for her and ask her several painful and psychological torment questions, such as, does his mother miss him? How sad are you for losing him? How did you feel when you heard the news of his death? Do you miss him? She couldn't bear it, so she stopped opening the door for Mary permanently. On one occasion she knocked on the door again. This time Brown's father was the one who opened the door, not his aunt, and I asked her to see Brown. The poor mother told Mary that Martin died, but Mary's answer from the severity of his ugliness froze the blood in her veins, where she replied, "Oh yes, I know he is dead. I just want to see him in his coffin." Unconsciously, Martin's mother closed the door in his face, and God knows the psychological pain she felt, especially after discovering that this innocent little girl is the devil who killed her child in cold blood. In those days, at school, during class, Mary took the paper and pen, began drawing a picture of a boy lying on the ground in an abandoned house, and added a drawing of the medicine glass, the same position in which Brown was found dead. Curiously, most of the children knew how Martin died, but suspicious she was the only child to paint the scene shortly after. Mary went with her friend Norma. A nursery school broke into her and they vandalized her and wrote a lot of notes on the walls. The notes she wrote should have caused her immediate arrest. She wrote letters supporting her responsibility for Martin Brown's death, and even more terrifying in those wall messages promising that she would not stop and would continue to kill after the police arrived at the nursery and read the notes. They assumed Mary was just joking, a heavy joke. It's similar when we see a horror movie in which a child, a monster or an alien or a ghost, and then he tells his family, the police and friends, but they think he's joking or hallucinating and don't take him seriously. Mary would brag and tell her colleagues, friends, and neighborhood children that she was the one who was killed, which painted Brown with an evil laugh, but no one took his claim seriously until she killed a new victim to prove it to them. In one photo that went missing in a demonstration organized by city residents urging the government to demolish abandoned buildings, 2 children can clearly be seen in the crowd holding up the banner. One of these children was the bloodthirsty little serial killer Marbell. Experts and psychologists say that criminals are doing this strange act to satisfy their ego and narcissism, and to try hard to keep news of murder, kidnapping and criminality spread among people for as long as possible. It's like actors addicted to trends. As soon as people start talking about them, they become the focus of attention. They want this noise to continue, talk and attention, and when it stops, they become aggressive and stupid, just like actresses and addicted influencers. She was addicted to hearing people talk about her crimes. She felt proud, arrogant and narcissistic, and that she proved herself terrifyingly. Mary was looking for any way to draw attention towards her. On May 26, 1968, it was Mary's 11th birthday. She was at her friend Norma's house, and suddenly, without warning, Mary pounced on Norma's little sister. She was going through such a wave of violence and anger that Norma's father had to forcibly remove her from the house. However, this was not surprising because everyone knew her mood swings. On the same day that the attack took place, the 2 friends decided to break into another nursery so that he could sabotage it. The next day, the staff discovered Mary's massacre, and shockingly that she had left notes admitting everything, even though the little devil repeatedly told them that she was the one who had been killed, but the poor stupid cops refused to believe her. And so they did with these new notes. The police read the notes, in which Mary says, "I killed so I can go back," and another note says, "We killed Martin Brown. Fuck you bastards." Her hand, and I considered it a heavy joke. On July 31, 1968, 2 months after the first murder, her friend Mary killed a new child named Brian Howe, whom she killed by strangling the place near the same area where Martin Brown was killed. After his soul had lost his small body, the monster inside Mary appeared, and in the manner of Zero, Mary not only killed, but moved on to mutilate the corpses on the little one's stomach to later change it to the letter M, which denotes the first letter of her name Mary, in order to prove to them that this time she was the one who was killed. The ugliness did not end here, but brought with it scissors and cut parts of his hair. His legs were torn apart and, too, his genitals were cut off. The news of Brian's disappearance reached his family, and his sister began looking for him. Mary met Brian's sister and offered to help her search. They searched the entire neighborhood after finding the child's body. The neighborhood panicked, and many thought there was a serial killer roaming around, and this killer might be targeted by young children. After the child's death, the investigators began to be suspicious, and the police began to reconsider currently in those notes that they were finding in the nursery, and most likely it was not just a heavy-blooded joke. Especially since the forensic after the autopsy of Brian's body discovered that his body was not subjected to abuse. This indicates that the killer is not an adult, and may be a child, and here he grabbed the end of the string. Police began to move and asked for an interview with local children and Brian's colleagues, hoping that one of them had seen something useful for the case. Of all the children, Mary Norma is the most suspicious of the police because of their strange behavior while asking them questions. Norma, for example, while asked questions by interrogators, the questions were quickly answered and at least sad. The case is linked to the death of a young child, but shockingly, she didn't stop smiling. Investigators noticed that Norma was questioning a child's murder as if he were a joke, unlike Mary, who answered questions seriously. At that time the girls were very young, 11 years old. When she sat down in front of the interrogators, their testimony was conflicting and each gave details contrary to the story told by her friend. The interrogators sensed suspicion and began to observe Mary at Ibrahim's funeral. One of the interrogators was observing Meyer's behavior from afar and said that the girl he described her as laughing, rubbing her hand when she saw a coffin. His suspicious actions motivated her to question her again, and the police summoned him and her friend Norma and asked her a lot of questions. Mary sensed that the interrogators approached her and she tried to camouflage them as a desperate attempt or the dance of a slaughtered rooster. Mary said she saw Brian Hawa, another 8-year-old nerve man in the same area where the incident took place, and that boy with a broken cut, and here was the fall, and Mary fell into the trap that ended everything, because the police did not reveal any information about the mutilation of the body with scissors to the press or the general public. It was secret details known only to two parties, the first party detectives and police, and the second party, which is certain, Brian's killer. Mary was enthusiastic and evasive in her answers, but the police confined him to detailed questions. To give up in the end. Norma confessed everything, blamed each on Mary, and began cooperating with the police, where she said that Mary told her that she was enjoying strangling both Mariah and Martin, and enjoyed disfiguring his body. The trial chapter begins. In a trial that Norma was acquitted and considered by the jury as a mere victim, and was only under negative influence, the prosecutor told the court that Mary committed her crimes only for pleasure and excitement to kill. When the news and details came out to the media, British society was shocked by the horror of the information, especially since the features of this child do not show any signs of murderers and criminals. Psychiatrists examined and diagnosed Mary's condition and concluded that she showed obvious signs of psychopathic personality. Based on this diagnosis, the jury issued a verdict convicting Mary in December 1968 of manslaughter, not murder, as court psychiatrists convinced the jury that Mary showed classic symptoms of psychopathy and could not be held fully responsible for her actions. The British press began to write headlines, calling her the devil child and calling her a dangerous person, and saying that she posed a very great danger to other children. She was sentenced to life imprisonment at the behest of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, first sent to the Red Bank, a secured and high-security housing unit in St. Helens, Lancashire, and then transferred more than once, despite being in prison and the story and murders ending. Neither newspapers, nor magazines, nor television channels have calmed down. It has been a talking and attention station for several years. The greatest blame was placed on the death of children and the transformation of Mary into a psychopathic criminal. On her mother, Betty, the prostitute, who gave birth to her through a fleeting relationship despite the space and the ugliness she committed against her daughter, as a child, including torture, abuse, and even survival. Her mother did not change at all. She tried to earn a living and earn money and ride on the wave of her daughter's tragedy by exploiting the greed of the press. She decided to sell her daughter Mary's stories more than once, and even sold them papers and leadership notes written by Mary. Mary spent 12 years in separate prisons in the UK. Then the news subsided. She made headlines again in September 1977, after she briefly escaped from an open prison in Moray, but was soon arrested by the police and returned to her cell, losing all privileges in prison for 28 days. Then Marie was released in 1980 at the age of 23 under special authorization, and remained under strict surveillance, and even more, to avoid being chased by the media, and give it a new lease in life. But soon the popular press discovered her whereabouts and tracked her, forcing him to abandon her home more than once. In 1984, just 4 years after her release, Mary became a mother and gave birth to a baby girl. Mary and her child lived in hell in her hometown of outside. The townspeople kept chasing her to leave their city and then writing a biography for her and paying her a large sum for it, while the United Kingdom tried to prevent the publication of her autobiography. Just as it transformed the lives of Brian and Martin's families to hell. Her life with her child also became shocking. That Mary hid her black past from her daughter and did not tell her anything of what she had committed as a little girl, who did not find out until she was 14 years old through the media, newspapers, and people's words. One day, an army of journalists attacked her house to the point that they set up tents in front of the door of the house, and tied up there. Mary and her daughter were forced to flee her home and put sheets on their heads like the sheets they put on the defendants before they entered the court. On May 21, 2003, Mary won a legal battle in the Supreme Court in order to keep her and her daughter secret for life. This judicial decision was the first of its kind in the UK and a precedent for the permanent protection of identity. This decision is in the name of Mary. In 2009, the child killer became a grandmother, and today Mary lives in protective custody at a secret address. And according to the law, she and her daughter will remain anonymous and protected forever, by court decision, with a special order protecting her, even after the autopsy, and until the time I shoot this video. This story in all details gives us great wisdom, and it is learned from a young age, like engraving on stone. Literally, the famous psychologist said that most human knots are formed when he was young. It is impossible to get out of his life unless he leaves life permanently. Give me your opinion on Mary's story. Do you think she is responsible for all her actions? Being a human being a choice and not a path? Or does her mother have the biggest role in turning her into a murderer?